Hello, everyone. We're going to finish up today, and it's going to be a little shorter, sort of my part. And then I have a few slides at the end, so that we can do kind of a mock course hearing in for each slide. We can have a different person, or one person can do the whole thing. We'll see how it goes. This last topic is basically just what are the sort of things that you study in art history. So last week, what we talked about are kind of questions or current issues in art history. And maybe this is, after I put this together, I thought maybe this should come before, but this is kind of the general topics and then more specific topics. And if you think about it, and I will do this a little bit, those current issues and those questions that we covered last week are kind of covered in this. So it works that we do this week as well. And just to remind you where we've been, we started off this whole thing talking about why art matters, and we discussed different reasons that art is important in people's lives. And then we went into the sort of describing art, just kind of naming things and talking about composition. And then after that, we kind of layered on the idea of context and iconography. And so, looking at symbols in artworks, or, kind of figuring out in what place in the historical record an artwork comes from, and how the artwork reflects that, and then maybe how the art changed the historical period as well. And then again, last week we did current issues and current questions in art history. So now I remember the reason that this is at the end is because if you choose from here to sort of go on to art history, this is a good sort of stepping off point. You'll be able to see, like, oh, if I like this topic, here are all the things that I can, go to next. So, okay, next slide. Okay, so, in that sort of last objective, there's different explanations of different kinds of art periods, or, geographical centers of art. And if you study art history, if you go on, then there are sort of grand classes, like a grand scope class. One of them is Western art, and Western art is what, if you go to the Louvre Museum and, you see art from Vermeer or Leonardo da Vinci, or if you see art from, America in 1945, all of that is kind of Western art. And an example of sort of what falls into Western art are Gothic cathedrals. And that is in this tradition of sort of Western Europe, which is kind of why they call it Western art. So any art that sort of comes out of Western Europe is known as Western art. And then you have Asian art, which encompasses basically everything east of Europe, including the Middle East, sort of, that has its own kind of category, but, Pakistan, India, China, Japan, sort of all the art that kind of is east of Western Europe, and then, or east of Europe. And then, because we put things into big categories, African art, which isn't a monolithic thing. There are many different cultures in Africa, but again, it's just like Western art and Asian art in that it encompasses a grand scope. So, I forgot to say that in Asian art, an example is a Tibetan mandala, which is these kind of circular paintings that are part of Buddhism. And they have sometimes monsters in them, and they have these, it's got a whole sort of structure of different phases of the journey through life. And then in African art, one example is the Benin bronzes, which are in the news right now because France is giving back some of the art that they stole. I think we talked about this a little bit last week. Not all of it, but some of it. And then you have art of the Americas, and that ranges from, you know, Incan art to the Mayan temples, excuse me, to Native American art, to like that desk that we looked at last week is art of the Americas, in that it is it's by an indigenous a native Canadian person who made it. So sort of anybody who makes art that is indigenous to North or South America is art of the Americas. And then art of the Pacific has to do with like Polynesian culture or New Zealand or Australia. Like, I guess the Aboriginal art in Australia might fall into a different category, maybe its own, but I think it kind of usually gets grouped into all of this. So that's kind of the world. If you look around at the world and you're thinking about a topic that is interesting to you, those are the bigger topics. Let's go to the next slide. And then you've got sort of more specific topics within that. So let's say you've taken all these courses in art history and now you're sort of looking to specialize a bit. And these are kind of subtopics. There's feminism in art. And that's a broad scope of things, and we'll actually look at a few examples. And then there's a whole sort of topic in art history about destruction and looting and trafficking of stolen art. It's like it's its own sort of thing that you can study. And then mosaics, which are the little tiles, or metalwork or glasswork, photography, textiles like quilts or carpets. Architecture is its own sort of thing as well. And then I put multiculturalism in there because that has to do, it kind of encompasses a lot of things, but mostly it is sort of exploring overlooked artists or art and bringing it to the mainstream. And then, can you go to the next slide, Ben? And then the thing is that those broad sweeping things and these more specific things often will intersect. You can easily go, well, I'm going to do feminism in, you know, Western art, or I would like to study colonial museums like the Louvre or the National Gallery in London, and then restitution, how they give the art back and why they should give the art back. You know, there's the art of sort of manuscript making, like illuminated manuscripts in the Middle Ages, which is like the Bible, or the Aztec Codex, which is this this whole sort of book that was made by the Aztecs while the Spanish were there. And then you've got, so what I'm trying to say is, if you look at the Aztec Codex, it might be that you're interested in manuscripts and you're interested in art of the Americas. Or you might be interested in multiculturalism and textiles. And so the quilts that were made as signs for the Underground Railroad, you know, sort of encompass that. You might be interested in the art of tattoo making. And then you can study Polynesian tattoos, because they have this whole sort of language and they mean these different things. And so you study the art of the Pacific and you get tattoo art. And then if you're into architecture and you're into art of the Middle East, you can study something like the Syrian beehive homes, which are these kind of, they are what they sound like. They're these kind of structures that keep you cool in the desert or in really hot places. And it's not just the Syrians that have made these. I'm just sort of giving you an idea of, again, this idea of overlapping or intersecting topics. You want to go to the next one, Ben? Okay, so in addition to, like, let's say you want to do feminism, you want to look at feminism and art. All three of these things have a sort of a different angle when you're looking at feminism and art. So if we look at that one on the left, by, her name is Angelica, by the way, Kaufman. And it's called Cornelia Pointing to Her Children as Her Treasures. And this is I think she was a German woman, but she was in England. She was like one of two women that were allowed to be in the painting academy in England at the time. Although when they would do drawings or paintings of nude men, the women weren't allowed. But this painting is about this one woman who's kind of showing off her jewelry and saying, look at my beautiful jewelry. And then the other woman is saying, my precious treasures are my children. And there's a subtitle to this, which is these two boys are eventually going to be Roman emperors, maybe leaders of Rome. And so the point of this is that like it was a woman painted it, and then her sort of greatest treasure were her two sons that will be meaningful someday. And then you have this sculpture in the middle by Praxiteles, who's like one of the 5 most famous ancient Greek sculptors. And it's the Aphrodite of Knidos. And before this, there had never really been nude women sculptures. There was always nude men sculptures, but this was kind of the first nude woman. And there's a whole thing about her kind of hiding her genitals, and there's this kind of shame, and even her sort of her anatomy is a little male, and but this is by a male sculptor. This is not a woman who made this. But the point of this is when you look at a work like this, you can go, well, you know, what was the mindset of the Greeks at the time, and why did this woman feel like she had to hide herself, but in this sort of provocative way as well? And why, you know, why was it so famous? And then you start to think about how women have been portrayed in art, you know, for the past 2,500 years or whatever, and it all kind of comes back to this sculpture and her pose. And then the last thing is, and this is the intersectional thing, is it's kind of a drawing, an ink drawing by a woman named Zhu Suzu. I'm probably not saying that right, but it's, you know, she was a courtesan. She had many lovers in this sort of court during the 1600s in China. And courtesans were also meant to be poets and artists. And then, you know, she's making this image of this woman at this table. I kind of can't see what's happening because I have my thing away. She might be making art at the table. I'm not really sure what she's doing there. But the point is, again, this is sort of intersectional in that it's Asian art, it's a female artist. She's doing something probably, you know, considered one of the feminine arts. But painting wasn't one of the feminine arts. She was like this kind of rebel woman a little bit, and she had many lovers and husbands, and she joined a Buddhist cult. There's a whole great story about this woman. But again, all 3 of these are sort of different angles that you can take if you're interested in studying, you know, Asian art or ancient Greek art or Western neoclassicism or something. And then you can sort of subgenre with, you know, what is it like for this or that. Can you go to the next slide? Okay. And then you can also sort of look at a similar thing, but then how it sort of plays out across the world. So you have 3 different versions of a quilt here, and they all have different reasons for existing, and they all are sort of interesting. They have interesting stories. But for example, the Pakistani quilt they use sort of old shawls or scraps of cotton to sort of stuff the quilt to make it thicker, and then they have these angular lines or patterns. And then the sashiko from Japan, they had like excess indigo, so they would dye all their cloth, and then these markings, or these sort of things that they did, it first started from fixing their clothes. Like they would have rips in their clothes. And I don't know if you know about kintsugi, which is that art of repairing, bowls or cups with sort of a gold kind of a glue. Like you show the repair in the cup, and this kind of goes along with that idea. Like if you're repairing something, it's kind of like you show the repair. So totally different reasons for these two different kinds of quilts, but they're quilts nonetheless. And then you have the Hawaiian quilt, and Hawaiian quilts are usually botanical in nature. They usually have flowers, and sometimes they'll do like flags or something. But before the missionaries arrived in Hawaii in like the 1780s, I think, they didn't have cotton. So they didn't even make quilts like this until someone introduced a new material to them. They made some kind of quilt thing, but nothing like these cotton quilts. And so again, the whole point of what I'm trying to say to you is that you have a lot of options on what to study, and then if you want to get more specific, there's also that as well.